Hi everyone, I'm Alex Dykes, and this is a Graco 50 Classic Ride child seat, which means it is time for our weekly child seat review. And today I have a 2014 Lexus CT 200H. After having tested Mercedes entry-level Mercedes in the US, as well as the entry-level Audi A3 in the US, you can find those reviews as well on my channel, I decided it was time to test the entry-level Lexus in the United States. However, unlike those other two competitors to the Lexus, this is much more fuel efficient. So this model has been getting me 41.2 miles per gallon during my week of driving. So it's not only the least expensive Lexus in the United States, it's also by far the most efficient. Now, in many ways, the CT 200H is more practical than the A3 or the CLA. The CLA is a four-door coupe-styled vehicle, so we don't get a whole lot of room in the back of that CLA. And the Audi A3 is a very traditional sedan profile, whereas the CT is available only as a hatchback in the United States. Now, we're told that Audi will probably be offering the A3 hatchback at some point in the US, but at this time it's strictly a sedan. The hatchback profile means that it's much easier to get child seats in and out of the CT. As you can see right here, we have a relatively large and relatively square rear door opening, as you'd expect from a hatchback. Closing the door, you can also see that the roof line of the CT 200H remains relatively constant and relatively high all the way to the back. We also have a relatively squared off back end, which is good for cargo practicality. It's important to keep in mind that the CT 200H is an entry-level Lexus, and it is one of the smaller entries in the Lexus family. Although this car does share certain components with the Prius, it is about 5 to 6 inches shorter than the Prius in just about every dimension, and a lot of that comes in play in the rear seat legroom. So this front seat is adjusted all the way back in its tracks, although even I at 6 feet tall, my feet are still touching the floorboards in the car, so this is still relatively comfortable. And I think even if I were to be in this car, I would probably only adjust the seat forward by about an inch or so. What that means is that with the front seat all the way back in its tracks, as you can see here, there's really no way to insert a rearward-facing child seat in the CT. You just can't get this into the proper position in the rear seat with the front seat as it is adjusted. Let's go ahead and go back to the front seat and see exactly how we'd have to adjust the seat in order for this rearward-facing child seat to fit properly. All right, and we're now in a position where that rearward-facing child seat is fitted properly into the CT 200H. So you can see I do have about an inch of legroom left right up here up front. Obviously, there is a slight safety concern associated with this because there's going to be a little bit less crush room going on right here, but it is relatively comfortable. I could do this for a number of hours or even on a long road trip. And that really does separate this from something like the Mercedes-Benz CLA 250 because you simply can't do that and fit an adult comfortably in the front seat. Hopping back into the rear of the CT, you can see I have about 2 inches of room between this front seat back and the back of this rearward-facing child seat, which is about the recommended distance. Makes it much safer in a rear-end style accident. More importantly, I could do this over here on the driver's side as well. I'm 6 feet tall, as I said earlier, and I could put this seat on the driver's side and sit relatively comfortably in the CT 200H. More importantly than that, however, I could do that until the child was about the right age in order to put them in a forward-facing child seat. And that is most important, is can you live with that seating position, not just for a single weekend or a single day out, but can you live with that seating position until the child is old enough to go in a forward-facing child seat? The CT scores surprisingly well in the 2 across the back child seat test. As is always the case with compact vehicles, get your center child seat in place first because the outboard child seat is not going to necessarily be in the center of the outboard seat. And that's true for the CT 200H. In this configuration, the outboard child seat is relatively close to that door. That is something you might want to watch. And so if you're putting just 2 child seats in your car, then you want to use the 2 outboard seats. It's probably going to be the best configuration all the way around. One center child seat does work fairly well in the CT 200. One thing to keep in mind when installing a child seat is that the lap and shoulder belt is not going to be quite as safe as using the latch anchors, and that's why they're there on your car. However, most vehicles out there on the market don't permit you to use the latch anchors for a center child seat position, and that's definitely true in the CT 200H. You can only use the latch anchors for the outboard seats for this center child seat if both the vehicle's manual and the child seat's manual agree that this is both possible with the child seat and with the vehicle. Even though the Graco Classic Ride 50 child seat does allow you to do that with this child seat, the Lexus CT instruction manual makes no mention of you being able to use those latch outboard anchors for the center child seat, so you just shouldn't do it. Still, this outboard seating position is relatively comfortable. I can strap myself in, and the center child seat doesn't interfere with my seat belt buckle. I'm now strapped in back here in the back of the CT, and it's not quite as comfortable width-wise as something like an Audi A3 or a Volvo S60, but I have an awful lot more headroom back here in the CT than in the Mercedes, the Audi, or even that Volvo S60 model. And that's because this is a hatchback, as I said earlier. It's not a sedan, and therefore I just get more headroom in the back than those sedan-oriented options. The Mercedes, of course, wasn't really designed for an adult in the back, and I had to cock my head severely to one side. The Audi, my head was brushing the ceiling, so I had to slouch down a little bit. But in the CT, I can sit upright and sit very comfortably in the back. Now, of course, there's not a whole lot of shoulder room back here with these child seats, but overall, it's not as bad as some of the other options. The CT performs fairly well in the 3 across configuration. I did have to remove the outboard headrests in order for these child seats to fit properly with their top tether anchors on the back of the seat. However, this is better than the Audi A3 performed. The Audi A3 just wasn't wide enough for these Graco Classic Ride 50 child seats to fit 3 across the back. There are, of course, narrower child seats out there, but these are relatively average child seats, so you would have to specifically look for a narrow child seat in order to fit 3 across in that Audi A3, and it really wasn't very possible in that Mercedes-Benz CLA 250. Even though 3 child seats fit across the back of the CT, it's not exactly ideal. They are relatively tight against one another, and they are just touching the doors. They're not really pressing on the doors, but these child seats are definitely touching on the doors. So even in the CT 200H, you may want to look at narrower child seats because you do want some distance between the door and the child seat in order for the curtain airbags to function properly. Lexus has a well-deserved reputation for attention to detail, and it extends even to these latch anchors in the rear. They're hidden behind these little zippered sections in the rear seat back. So you can see you can just pull this little zipper down, and that reveals the latch anchor hidden right inside the seat back right there. They're relatively easy to find. If I grab a latch anchor, you can see you just insert the latch anchor right in there. Relatively easy to find, relatively easy to release as well. It's actually quite a large bar that's right back there in the seat back. When it comes to cargo carrying capacity, it's important to remember that none of these entry-level luxury models are terribly big when it comes to the cargo hold, but the CT 200H does have this hatchback, which makes it an awful lot more practical. We have a cargo net right back here in our particular model. We'll get that out of the way so you can see a little better in the cargo area. We'll just toss that forward. The CT comes with a standard tonneau cover, which makes it a little bit easier to hide the goodies in your trunk. And right here we have 2 large roller bags. This is a 24-inch roller bag. That's the size you can carry onto a domestic flight. This is a 26-inch roller bag, so this one you cannot carry onto a domestic flight. Those 2 fit relatively conveniently in the back, although you cannot put them on their side and close the tonneau cover or close the lid of the CT too well. Now we do have rear seat backs that do fold completely flat with the cargo area, and that does make it an awful lot handier back here. But let's see how many child seats we can easily fit in the rear. Let's lock this foot into place, and one fits relatively well back there. I believe the hatch will close if it's in that position. Yep, it sure will. So we have one down. And the verdict is, if you remove the tonneau cover from the CT, you can fit 3 Graco Classic Ride 50 child seats right there in the back. You can't fit a whole lot of other cargo in the back, but that is relatively more accommodating than I thought it would be. Overall, that same statement applies to all aspects of the CT 200H when it comes to child seat friendliness. The CT is an awful lot more accommodating than I thought it would be. Judging by the size of the vehicle and the relative dimensions of the vehicle on paper, I didn't think this would be any more accommodating than the Audi A3, but in reality it was. You can fit 3 of these average-sized child seats across the rear bench. It's not exactly as accommodating as I would like ideally. Now, if you are a family of 5 looking for a Lexus hybrid, then something like an ES300H is going to be considerably more accommodating across the back, except that it will be a decent amount more expensive than this CT 200H. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2014 Lexus CT 200H. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos, including the full review of the 2014 CT 200H coming in about the next day or so. You can also find me over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos, and you can see what I'm driving this week. You can also email all of your questions to alex@alexandautos.com, and I'll see you next week.